At the request of a few of you in the comments section, today we're going to take a look at the Final Fantasy XV PC benchmark, which was released just a few days ago. The game doesn't release until early March, but the benchmark tool should give PC owners a rough idea of how well the game will run on their machines. Interestingly, you can't adjust the full range of graphical settings in the benchmark. You have to choose from 720p, 1080p, or 4K resolution, and light, standard, or high visual presets. A standalone benchmark tool is cool in its own right, so I'm not knocking Square Enix offering it ahead of time, but it would have been nice to have some more options to tweak. Still, we have enough to go off that we can make some predictions. If you enjoyed this video, please consider supporting this channel on Patreon, link is in the description. I ran the benchmark on 3 different PCs. The Potato Masher, whose i5-750 and GTX 760 usually compete against the PS4. The Potato Masher Pro, whose same i5-750 and a GTX 1060 usually are compared to the PS4 Pro or the Xbox One X. And finally, my personal rig, which is running an i7-4790K and a GTX 1080 Ti. Full specs are in the video description if you want to check them out. I didn't run every level on every machine, I just stuck to what someone with those specs might realistically want to try. You'll see when we get to the results. Also, because this is a benchmark, there's no frame rate limiting at work, so you'll see plenty of frame time hitching. That's perfectly normal for an unlocked benchmark, but it's a little bit annoying to watch, just warning you ahead of time. Square Enix gives you a score after each run, and that corresponds to this list that tells you how well your machine might run the game. It's nice that at certain scores, Square tells you that you might want to turn the settings up because you're leaving visuals on the table, but there are a lot of levels that I think could be somewhat simplified to a 4 or 5 tier system. Again, the tool is very cool, that's just my preference. First, let's compare the different visual levels. The regular Masher is the only PC that I ran at 720p standard, and that was in an effort to lock at 60 FPS. The game is fairly demanding, and the CPU usage especially can be very high at times, so a locked 60 wasn't possible. The frame rate was in the mid-40s to 50s almost the entire time, and it looks like a blurry, crummy mess, and I really wouldn't want to play this. The Masher was also the only PC I ran at 1080p and light settings. While this is sharper than 720p, the lowered settings don't look great. Aliasing in particular is awful, with stair-stepped shimmering edges covering everything in the foreground, especially the edges of the car. I try to avoid playing at this setting as much as possible, and you'll see what I mean right now. So now let's make it interesting: 1080p light on the left, 1080p standard in the middle, and 1080p high on the right, along with which machine is running each. There's quite a bit of frame rate variation, so try to not let that affect viewing the visual differences. Again, everything is unlocked here. The first thing that stood out was that standard looks decent and high looks a bit better, but light is quite a bit worse than either. Light has very visible aliasing, poor shadows, no noticeable ambient occlusion, poor ground cover and textures, etc. Now, being able to more finely customize this in the final game will of course give us some more options, but this isn't a very good looking preset. The difference between standard and high is more subtle, but still noticeable. High has better, longer shadows, more dense ground cover, more tessellation, and better textures. Also notice how standard and high appear to have a depth of field effect that light doesn't have. Moving on to 4K, and the standard and high presets appear to be closer than they are at 1080p. While there are noticeable differences visible, like tessellation, shadows, textures, etc., all the other stuff we were talking about before, aliasing and overall detail have gotten a bump because of the resolution difference. Even light looks quite a bit better than it does in 1080p, although it still has the flat, static look of a PS3 game just running at a much higher resolution. That's because there isn't much dynamic anything, dynamic shadows, dynamic lights, you name it. Now, I don't say that to mean that you shouldn't play the game at light if that's all you can swing, but it's clear that that's the settings you'll be using if you need to settle. The game can look quite good at standard and even better at high. So, how did each platform score? Here are the results with Square Enix's grading rubric there for you to look at. Green means the respective PC performed fairly high or above, blue is standard, and orange is low to slightly low. I'm hopeful that being able to customize the visuals will get me better results out of each platform than just sticking to a default preset. Anyway, that's about all I have for you today. Let me know in the comments if you'd like me to do a full Final Fantasy XV review and comparison, and on which systems. Right now I'm thinking the PS4 versus the Potato Masher, and the Xbox One X versus the Potato Masher Pro, and I guess I can leave my personal rig on the sidelines unless the Xbox thrashes the Masher Pro and we want to compare it to a higher end PC. So far, this appears to be a respectably optimized game, so we'll see what happens at the final release. Thanks for watching, and have a great day.